This episode of the Slate Culture Gabfest is brought to you by The Relentless, a podcast from Slate Studios and Century 21 Real Estate. The Relentless is back for a third season, and this time they're looking at the ways entrepreneurs overcome barriers so they can move fearlessly in business and beyond. Join returning host Kristen Meinzer as she talks to everyone from athletes to venture capitalists who have used strength and motivation to find success in the face of obstacles. Listen to learn how these passionate industry leaders transformed their fears into inspiration. Season 3 of The Relentless is out now. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Stephen Metcalf, and this is the Slate Culture Gabfest She Said, He Said edition. It's Wednesday, November 23rd, 2022. On today's show, She Said is the new feature film recounting the struggles of two New York Times reporters as they attempt to break the Harvey Weinstein story. It stars Carey Mulligan and Zoe Kazan. And then on Hulu, we have Fleishman is in Trouble. It's a limited that stars Jesse Eisenberg and Claire Danes as a now-divorced couple who have come to loathe one another. It's a serio-comic and very Rashomon-like anatomy of a deteriorating marriage. And finally, what to make of the fact that Joan Didion's estate, art, furniture, books, and iconic pairs of sunglasses fetched crazy sums at auction. We will discuss, but first joining me today is Julia Turner, the deputy managing editor of the LA Times. Hey, Julia.
Hello, hello.
And always psyched to have Jamelle Bouie, New York Times columnist extraordinaire, back on the show. Of course, Slate alumnus, too. Hey, Jamelle.
Hello.
Psyched to talk these movies and TV shows. Shall we make a show?
Let's do it.
All right, well, She Said is a journalism picture in the classic style of like All the President's Men and Spotlight more recently. In atmosphere, it's a thriller. In execution, more of a behind-the-scenes procedural, journalism procedural. Here we follow as two Times reporters, in real life, Jodi Kantor and Megan Twohey, in the movie played by Zoe Kazan and Carey Mulligan. Cold call, they knock on doors, they pound the pavement, and they're also agonizing over a huge moral dilemma. In trying to get their sources, women who are afraid to talk, they understand the risks they're putting themselves and these women at and are unsure whether to move forward. The movie is directed by Maria Schrader, who's best known, I think, for the Netflix hit Unorthodox. Let's listen to a clip. In the clip we're about to hear, Jodi Kantor, played by Zoe Kazan, is convincing Megan Twohey, played by Carey Mulligan, that it is, in fact, eminently worth doing. Let's listen.
What is it exactly that we're looking at here?
We're looking at extreme sexual harassment in the workplace. These young women walked into what they all had reason to believe were business meetings with a producer, an employer. They were hopeful. They were expecting a serious conversation about their work or a possible project. Instead, they say he met them with threats and sexual demands. They claim assault and rape. If that can happen to Hollywood actresses, who else is it happening to?
Julia, let me start with you. I made the obvious comparisons to Spotlight and All the President's Men. How did you feel this stacked up relative to those and as a movie in its own right?
I think this is a very, very good journalism movie. I was both gripped and moved by it, although I'm excited that there may be some contrary opinions on the call. But what I actually think is revolutionary about this movie is it is the best depiction I have ever seen of modern working parenthood. Like, the way in which the movie very quietly and very subtly and not too ostentatiously renders the fact that the people who are doing this work, who are being professional, who are finding satisfaction and stress in their professions, are people with partners and children and emotional fluctuations and postpartum depression, as the Megan Twohey character is depicted as having in the film, and who do the work anyway. And it's not the, there have been some films where that is the point of the film. Oh gosh, can she have it all? How do you do it? And this movie just depicts that it is what modern work is for, workers of this kind, white-collar workers. Often involves two-income families and two working parents. And the juxtaposition of that thematic material with the story that they're working to get, which is fighting for the right of women to pursue their professions without fear of harassment derailing their careers or setting them off on entirely different paths and quashing their artistic and professional potential, I found incredibly powerful.
Yeah, Jamelle, I mean, the extreme wisdom of Julia's response to this wise movie is interesting to me. It seems to me what ties those two things together powerfully that makes the movie either work or not work, right? If you buy this, you buy the movie, is the cost. As they keep saying in the course of the movie, these two journalists, the very power discrepancy that exploited these women in the first instance, right, typically kicks in and buys or bullies them into silence. And so they're faced with a collective action problem. Like, we need everyone to jump into the pool at once or nobody is going to do it. And anything short of that could result in compounding the initial crime. Like, you might be re-victimizing the victim. So you feel the moral quandary at the same time you feel this is thriller-like suspense of not only will X person, it's not Deep Throat, it's not like one person, it's like, will essentially an entire community break its conspiracy of silence and bring down Harvey Weinstein? Did you find this effective in that regard?
I didn't. I take Julia's point about the film being a great depiction of professional class working parenthood. I think it is. I do think that aspect of both characters could have been like better integrated into the investigation, or vice versa, the investigation better integrated into their experience as working parents and as partners in addition to as journalists. But I guess my issue with the movie is that I felt that so much of the investigation part of it was just like very didactic and very sort of like very preoccupied with just explaining things to you in info dumps, and not so much in depicting the process of discovery. It does that. It doesn't not do that. And the times when it does it, I think it's one of the movies at its strongest. But I think that there's also too much of, we're going to have a phone call and there's going to be pretty much one person on the line. And they're just going to like give you, a block of text that you can then move forward to. Basically, you have a question or something, this block of text will answer that question for you. And I think you can pull that off once, maybe in any kind of movie. I think you can pull that off once. And like these sort of journalism, I call them document movies, because it's not, it doesn't necessarily have to be about journalism, but like this kind of structure for a film involves people sifting through documents. You can do it twice in maybe one of these movies, but I think the script kind of leans on this a lot, rather than show you the investigation. My sense, like the movie's over 2 hours long, and it seems to me that they maybe had a hard time either cutting or streamlining, because I'm not necessarily sure the movie should be 2 hours long or over 2 hours long. And it makes me think that part of what might have happened is that halfway through the film, Carey Mulligan's character kind of drops out for a while, as Zoe Kazan's character is traveling to London, to Wales, I believe, to San Francisco. And that I haven't read the book on which the script is based, but I have to assume that this is how things played out in real life. And I think that there's a certain amount of like fidelity to what really happened that actually is not good for the story or the characters. That I think there could have been some license taken to both give Carey Mulligan and Zoe Kazan's characters just more to do, and better cinematically depict the unfolding of the investigation, because I think that's where I think the movie is at its weakest, sort of like actually cinematically presenting this investigation unfolding and the information coming in.
I think that's interesting, and your point about the dialogue is, there's a way in which the film is also functioning as a brief in defense of journalism as practiced in the 21st century, and seems to feel an obligation to properly and judiciously and flatteringly represent like the avocation of journalists to uphold the creed and tell the truth and do, there's a little bit of sainthood in the portrayal of Jodie Cantor and Megan Twohey, even as it is depicting some of the personal challenges they're wrestling with. But yes, the dialogue with their editors is always like the editor just says the three things that you would say in the lawsuit about how you would defend the story, like get the documents, get him on the record, like get, like the conversations with the editors are stripped down to like, what would you want the ultimate First Amendment editor to say? And there's not like any personal foibling there. And I think probably because of that sense of desire for fidelity and representing, right, I think you probably could have made a better movie if you're like, what if we told a story that was kind of like the story of how they got the Harvey Weinstein story?
Right. Well, I mean, I would definitely say that some of the conversations in the movie sound like what the, various participants would like Harvey Weinstein's pit bull lawyer to imagine they were, right? Like they're somewhat sanitized, the kind of cynicism and necessary self-distancing that the hardcore journalists I know, practice in order to stay emotionally balanced during the often wrenching process of getting people to talk. It's cleaned up a little bit, or quite a lot actually, and it results in some clunkers, admittedly. I found this an enormously powerful movie. I sat there as the credits rolled, pinioned to my seat, as did I think everyone in the movie theater that I saw it with. I thought its virtues so completely outshone its obvious defects that it was a success both artistically and morally. I mean, Spotlight is a very, very clean, very streamlined, and almost perfect version of this, and there are all kinds of comparisons you can make there both ways. But I thought there was a resonance here. And also, I'm a sucker for the genre. I've spent my life effectively as a freelancer around journalists and journalistic organizations. I love all of these discussions, going back to All the President's Men, like what's going to go on A1, on and on and on. So I'm vulnerable to them.
No, don't get me wrong. I am also a sucker for this genre. If you have a movie where people are sifting through documents and someone at some point screams, "They knew," I'm in. I'm there.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting, Steve. I love journalism movies. There's so many different kinds with varying degrees of cynicism about the profession, and certainly in calling out the kind of extreme taut journal, like editors saying the exact right thing notion of those scenes. I don't mean to suggest that they were saying something wildly different, but there's been a huge conversation in media, in recent decades about propaganda, right? We love cop shows, we love crime shows. Like, what are the cop and crime shows really telling us about, our criminal justice system, how it works, whether it actually administers justice and to whom? And we're all journalists in our own ways, and so possibly we are not the clearest people to look at journalism movies, some of which are kind of journalisticanda. So I'm curious how you would place this within that question or dilemma of like the appropriate way to portray journalism on screen, Steve.
I mean, it's, as you pointed out, it's inseparable from the highly propagandized pseudo backlash against the MSM and against journalists in particular. I regard them as heroes. Net, they're obviously, like any profession you can name, there are ethical lapses, but journalism, the good journalistic outlets police themselves against it. So I have no problem with the degree of like shine to the knight's armor. The scenes that worked for me, of the procedural scenes, the ones that worked for me best were Dean Baquet the managing editor or whatever, head editor of the New York Times on the phone with Harvey Weinstein, which were so great because it's exactly that thrill, right? It's very minimalist. It doesn't feel that sanitized. And it's this moment where a person from a highly self-policing, rigorously self-policing, ethical profession is confronting a person who's an absolute travesty of all of those things and has gotten away with it because of his community's moral problems. And Baquet and everything he says is letting him know, you do not have the power here now, right? Like, you are not going to shape this or me or anything about what we write other than whatever on-the-record statement you want to make. And it's the spot, and I don't mean to recenter this narrative on Baquet. He's not the moral center of this movie in any way, shape, or form. That is simply all I'm saying, is that is the moment where the procedural aspect of it, to me, was very effective because it didn't seem sanitized and it really rang true.
Yeah, that scene is really interesting, and it highlights, I mean, this is the problem with, I guess, drawing any equivalence between what cops do and what journalists do. But ultimately, that kind of journalism boss has to, the profession has to be fair. It's part of its own self-policing that it insists it is fair, but it also gets to decide when it is being fair because it has the power to publish. And that's Baquet saying, no, we have it to our standards, the story, and you can participate or not, but we're going. And that it highlights that sense of the priesthood or the institution having to hold itself to its own standards, whether or not people outside the building respect them or understand them.
Right. Well, to me, it was just one form of power, liberal institutional power, for lack of a better phrase, coming up against essentially charismatic, like almost medieval levels of charismatic power, and saying, no, you're going to have to actually cede to this, right? And for me, that's powerful because to me, that is the civil war, among the civil wars, one of the big ones that we're currently fighting, and everything's at stake. All right, it's She Said, it's in theaters. Check it out. Let's move on.
It's time to reboot your credit card with Apple Card. Apple Card gives you unlimited cash back every day on every purchase. It's real cash you can spend right away. No need to wait for rewards. Apply now in the Wallet app on iPhone to see your credit limit offer with no impact to your credit score. Subject to credit approval, daily cash is available via an Apple Cash Card or as a statement credit. See Apple Card customer agreement for terms and conditions. Apple Cash Card is issued by Green Dot Bank, member FDIC. Accepting an Apple Card after your application is approved will result in a hard inquiry, which may impact your credit score.
All right, this episode is brought to you by Today Tix, TIX, your one-stop shop for theater tickets with the best value on tickets to Broadway and beyond. Just download the app or visit todaytix.com to find a show you want to see. Today Tix has amazing prices for some of the best theater out there, and they also have a huge cyber sale with savings of up to 50% off. I just have to say this one kind of resonates with me. I'm from New York City. Back in the day, I used to queue up to get discount tickets. Like physically, you had to go somewhere. I know that's impossible to imagine now in 2022, but physical location. Also had one of the more amazing experiences, Hamilton related. Everyone has a Hamilton related experience. Those tickets were so hard to get. I'd somehow gotten them and I was just in the line to go get them. And I think they had a ritual where every day they gave away, like the box office just suddenly just said to someone, you can have a ticket for $10. And that person, it was like they'd won the Powerball, right? Like that ecstasy. Well, you can get a little piece of that ecstasy now, and you don't have to queue up. You literally can just go online and go to todaytix.com. And what I think what's cool about this is that you can get your tickets months in advance or day of. You can do either one. It's the flexibility. And not only that, it's not just for Broadway, right? So if you're in London, it's the West End. If you're in other cities across the world, Chicago, LA, DC, San Francisco, Sydney, all of them obviously have thriving, compelling theater communities. Bing, bang, boom, right on your phone, right on the app. Suddenly you have tickets at a discount to go see what you want to see. So see that show you've always wanted to see or discover something new that you'll love just as much for even less. Go to todaytix.com/culture and use promo code culture to get $10 off your first Today Tix purchase. That's promo code CULTURE at todaytix, that's TIX.com/culture for an additional $10 off your first ticket purchase. That's todaytix.com/culture. All right, now is the moment in our podcast we talk business. Dana's out, so I'll handle it. Only one item of business to tell you about today. It's our Slate Plus segment this week. Jamelle is with us. We thought maybe we'd return to the topic of Twitter. Elon Musk obviously is going in several directions with it at once. Some anticipated, some unanticipated. We really like to talk to Jamelle, who's a tremendously delightful, gifted tweeter. He'll presumably tell us what Twitter now means to him, what its demise or slow degradation might mean, and does he have any red lines? Like, you cross the red line, Jamelle Bouie's out. He's quitting Twitter. All right, if you're a Slate Plus member, make sure you stick around for that conversation at the end of the show. If you are not a Slate Plus member, you can sign up today at slate.com/culture plus. Members get ad-free podcasts, lots of bonus content like the Slate Plus segment I just mentioned. You'll get to hear members-only programming on other Slate shows like Slow Burn, Political Gabfest, all the good ones. And remember, members get unlimited access to the great writing at slate.com. You will never hit a paywall if you're a Slate Plus member, never. I should also mention you'll be supporting our work and the work of our brilliant colleagues. These memberships are very important for Slate. So please sign up today at slate.com/culture plus. Again, that's slate.com/culture plus. All right, back to the show. All right, well, Fleishman is in Trouble is an adaptation of a 2019 novel about a collapsing marriage. We begin in this telling with He Said, the version of the story told from the point of view of Toby Fleishman, here played by Jesse Eisenberg. In his mind, at least, Toby was a noble victim of a monomaniacally ambitious woman. His wife, Rachel, played by Claire Danes, in his imagination, we come to discover, had become a money and status-obsessed harridan, while all Toby wanted was to be a heroic doctor and a humble dad. As the show progresses, this premise becomes the object of a rather intricate deconstruction by the show's narrator, who turns out to be Libby, Toby's friend, played by Lizzie Kaplan. Show's on Hulu, if I didn't say, and it's an adaptation of a Taffy Burdesser-Ackner novel from 2019. Let's listen to a clip. In the clip, we're going to hear Toby over dinner with friends describing what went wrong in his marriage. Let's listen.
Divorce is like that old Othello game, you know? You start your marriage with all the discs white, right? And then there's some black discs here and there along the way. You know, you fight, but ultimately you laugh and it's fine because the board is still mostly white, right? But then something happens and the marriage falls apart and suddenly the entire board is black.
Is that how you play Othello?
They should probably change the name Othello, you know?
Yeah, so now even the good memories are like tinged with darkness. You know, they're tainted like they were rotten from the start.
Not all of them.
Yes, man, all of them, okay? Now you look back at all those memories, like the fight you had on the honeymoon, the way you couldn't agree on like a name for your child, and suddenly they're no longer innocuous fights anymore. Now they're foreshadowing. I think when we get married, we really have no way to fully understand what forever means, you know?
That's what I'm always saying. Marriage is for suckers. How are you going to know how you're going to feel in 3 times the amount of years you've been alive for?
All right, Jamelle, let me start with you. This was a novel. It was a very, very voice-driven novel, as I've come to understand. The narrator of that was a sort of doppelganger of the author, stand-in for the author. Not always easy to adapt. They definitely went with voiceover. That was the decision they made here. What'd you make of this?
For being something, that's like pretty much entirely foreign to my experience, affluent white people or what are the Lower East Side? I don't know what those neighborhoods are. I'm going to play up the fact that I'm like a Southerner here. I'm just a humble country boy. I really enjoyed it. I've really enjoyed I watched the first 3 episodes, first 2. And I really enjoyed it. I like Jesse Eisenberg. I like him as an actor. I like Claire Danes. I like the entire cast. Lizzie Kaplan is great as the narrator. And I have been really absorbed in the story of this deteriorating marriage, or this marriage that deteriorated, and the kind of almost mystery of what specifically precipitated this. In the very clear sense you get from the beginning that Eisenberg's character, Mr. Fleishman, it's immediately clear that his perspective on this is very self-involved. And there is a lot that we do not actually know and a lot we're not getting. And I find it very compelling. And this is not normally my cup of tea as far as television goes. But I found this a very compelling watch. And I think all the performances are terrific. I think Eisenberg is very good in this.
Julia, let me just turn to you. It's got a lot of challenges, one of which is that, for the first couple of episodes, it may not be entirely clear that you're getting a highly interested, subjective account, i.e. Toby's account, of the marriage. I mean, especially because this voiceover is a third party who's not Toby, right? So voiceovers tend to be, they're either omniscient or they're heavily aligned with a character whose focalization is through whom we're getting the movie itself or whatever, the dramatic action itself. Here, actually, it turns out to be quite a discrepancy. It doesn't really come that clear in the first couple of episodes, does it? A little disorienting. How'd you find your way?
Yeah, I read the novel and enjoyed the novel quite a bit, and was excited about the casting for this. I feel like we have to pour one out for Dana, who enjoys talking about and looking at the acting of, and also the person of Jesse Eisenberg, as she has described on this show. Great cast, totally fun, interesting story. And I think your note of mystery, Jamelle, is totally dead on. Like what worked in the book, and part of what propels this story is the sense of like it's a whodunit. It's a psychological portrait of a crumbling marriage, but reframed as two mysteries. One, whodunit, how did the marriage end, and who's right and wrong about its demise, and also kind of a where the fuck is she? Because the precipitating incident is that Rachel, the wife, disappears, and Toby is sort of bizarrely unworried about it and just pissed and peeved about it for a while before his friends are like, maybe think a little harder about that. The narration did not work great for me, because when you have actors this good, it's kind of a bummer to not let them and their instruments and their faces and their voices tell the story. So my jury is out until I watch the whole thing, which I will, because I find it compelling. And yes, fancy New York material status anxiety dramas are certainly overrepresented in Hollywood, but they're not. It's not unfun or funny to see the elements of satire there, of the hedge fund bros getting skewered in their whiskey swilling great rooms. Like, that's perfectly fine entertainment. So the acting is so good that I'm curious to see whether the show can use the narrative, the voiceover, which feels a little overbearing in the first couple episodes, to pull off the trick of the perspective shifts that I know are coming from having read the book. So it doesn't feel like it's working to me, but maybe it's gonna work, is kind of my verdict so far.
I will say that it's not working for me after 2 episodes, in part because given how you have all these ingredients, right? On the one hand, you've got a social satire of Upper East Side, as you say, just kind of a pitiless social satire of the ultra rich in Manhattan, right? And then you've got this kind of, put upon, martyred Nebish, who's a doctor whose place within that social universe is drawn with enormous amounts of care. So he's shown at his job as not only being a doctor, but is going above and beyond in the way that doctors scarcely do anymore. He understands that there's a holistic nature to it, that bedside manner is really important, that you have to see the entire narrative of a patient in order to properly diagnose them. And he's a generous and kind pedagogue and mentor. It's not just about treating patients, it's about minting new doctors who have this same set of, empathetic skills in order to be a genuinely good one. So at the same time, he's derided as a complete, like, absolute lowest rung object of pity in this world of the ultra rich that he has access to. He's part of by virtue of his kid's private school, which is overpopulated by this upper 0.01%, and by his wife, who's made it big in her career. But then you have this problem of what's the relationship between this satire, which seems acute and accurate, as if it's intended to be a depiction. I mean, it's obviously an exaggerated depiction, but, and this like deep, almost Henry Jamesian intersubjectivity of multiple competing narratives, one of whom it's like, why is it being narrated by this third-party friend? Like, why has that friend decided? And it's and because you don't really know that what you're going to eventually get is this sort of Rashomon or Henry Jamesian, deconstruction of anything like the possibilities of an objective point of view. At first, you're like, why is it so centered upon his grievances? And why is she so horrible? And why were they ever together? I agree with you. It's rescued by the acting. But beyond a certain point, it's definitely got, like, it is, Jamelle, it is placing huge stockpile of TNT underneath the he said world. And you sense, okay, that fuse is lit. But over the course of 2 full hours, it's just unclear how that's going to unfold. And by the end of the second episode, I kind of lost my patience.
I think that's fair. I think that's totally fair. I like the cast so much, basically, and I'm so sort of like intrigued about the kind of like where is his wife question that's really keeping me that's keeping my attention more than anything.
Yeah, I think the tension, the other tension, which worked in the book and may turn out to work in the show, is like the satire of the world is so tart and funny in the book. I mean, even just putting her finger on the notion that there is this milieu in which being a wonderful and respected and well-compensated doctor is like a tedious humiliation, and the wife character is constantly trying to goad him into more lucrative and unethical jobs. Like, that's a funny observation. That's a sharp knife blade satire. There's been plenty of satire of this world, and what was the Nicole Kidman murder, Hugh Grant Sabati one, The Undoing? Right. The acuity of the observations in the novel is very sharp and funny when stacked up against, many criticisms, critiques, satires of this world. It's really good. And I sense in the making of the show this tension of so many lines in the book are just so good and so funny. Why not just have the narrator say them? But I do think that the show might feel more ambitious and exciting if it had actually found a way to use the medium of television to convey some of that observation of the world. Because the other thing that it raises is you've got this narrator who is giving you a lot. She's dishing with you a lot. She's telling you a lot about this world, but she's withholding the reveal of how her perspective is shifting as she's understanding what's going on. So the relationship with the narrator character is a little wild. And then Lizzie Kaplan is a great actress. I mean, she's always good in everything, and sort of gets steady work and is always respected, and yet is still a little undervalued. She's got a bit of that like Judy Greer energy, just find more things for Lizzie Kaplan to do. So to see her playing something so complicated is really exciting. And then having the feeling that she's just kind of like reading the audiobook to me while Jesse Eisenberg like pantomimes around the Upper East Side is like, I kind of want more. But I will keep watching. Like, I'm into it. And I think I'm curious to see. I feel like there's so much skill in the cast that I'm interested to see how they land the plane.
Interesting. I will say this, that the sort of preview after episode 2 of what's to come bore almost no relationship to the 2 hours I had just seen, that kept me intrigued. It's like, wait, what? I just can't put this 2 and 2 together and come up with 4. So maybe I'll stick with it. Anyway, it's Fleishman is in Trouble. It's on Hulu. Really remarkable performances. Check it out. All right, this episode of the Slate Culture Gabfest is brought to you by Masterclass, the place where you can learn singing from Mariah Carey, comedy from Steve Martin, filmmaking from Marty Scorsese, and that much more. With Masterclass, you can learn from the world's best minds anytime, anywhere, and at your own pace. You can learn how to write anything from a book, a screenplay, or just a letter. I could use help with that one. Learn how to make a dinner worthy of a Michelin star, or just how to make really good scrambled eggs. With over 180 classes from a range of world-class instructors, that thing you've always wanted to do. Get it out of the bucket list. Get it in IRL. Do it for real. It's closer than you think. I've been looking over these names, and it is quite a tough choice here, but I'm going to pick one if I had to choose one masterclass to start with. I got to go with Yotam Ottolenghi. Those, first of all, I've been to a couple of his restaurants. They're just fabulously, beautifully presented meals. And his cookbooks are era-defining, really. I think in some ways they're the equivalent of, fill in the blank, right? Like the Moosewood Cookbook or, Joy of Cooking or Deborah Madison, right? These during a period of 5 to 10 years, every kitchen you walked into had Ottolenghi cookbook in it, and still does. We're still in that era. Anyway, he teaches modern Middle Eastern cooking for Masterclass. What a conqueror that guy is, deservedly so. So check it out this holiday. Give one annual membership and get one free. Go to masterclass.com/culture today. That's masterclass.com/culture. Terms apply. All right, the Slate Culture Gabfest is brought to you by Progressive. What's the one thing you'd purchase with a little extra savings? A weighted blanket? Smart speaker? The new self-care trend you keep hearing about? Well, Progressive wants to make sure you're getting what you want by helping you save money on car insurance. Drivers who save by switching to Progressive save over $700 on average, and customers can qualify for an average of 6 discounts when they sign up. Discounts like having multiple vehicles on your policy. Progressive offers outstanding coverage and award-winning claim service. Day or night, they have customer support 24/7, 365 days a year. When you need them most, they're at their best. A little off your rate each month goes a long way. Get a quote today at Progressive.com and see why 4 out of 5 new auto customers recommend Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. National annual average insurance savings by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2020 and May 2021. Potential savings will vary. Discounts vary and are not available in all states and situations. All right, well, the author, the essayist and novelist Joan Didion went from admired to iconic. She went someplace mega in the last decade or so of her life, as befitting an icon. Relics, fragments of the cross, locks of hair, in short, her stuff. In reality, we're talking lamps, sofas, tables, china, napkins, books, and yes, Celine faux tortoiseshell sunglasses were sold at auction. They were gavelled down at sums vaster than anticipated, considerably more than anticipated. Jamelle, I've never canvassed you on your Joan Didion feelings. I almost want to start there. Do you have any history with her as a writer or any special admiration for her? How do you feel about Didion?
It's going to mark me as tremendously uncultured. I have never read any Joan Didion. I have no opinions or feelings about her. I have zero, complete absence of thought.
We could skip that, by the way. I don't know, Jamelle.
No, keep that in. Keep that in.
Yeah, okay, good. Thanks.
I feel like I appear to be too erudite, and I need people to know that my brain is empty of many things.
Please keep
This
that
is how you've done it. This is how you've mastered all of American history and so much of modern journalism and have so many interesting things to say and all of film history. It's just by leaving out Joan.
Yeah. There we go. All right. Well, let me try a different angle then. It seems to me the great virtue of books is that any one edition or copy of a book is just like another, so long as the words are the same, right? It's not true of a Picasso painting. or anything performance-based, but literature has this universality and mobility to it. It's not very object-based, right? Like, and so in some sense, isn't there something a little weird and primitive about venerating an author for their words, right? And yet somehow investing their stuff, like just their bric-a-brac in some instances, with this value and monetary value at that? Or am I just being kind of puritanical here?
No, I think it makes a lot of sense, actually, because we do that with all sorts of figures, right? You know, like we look at presidents, you know, presidents who are famous, important, whatever, for what they do, for maybe what they say, for how they act, not so much for their things, but the artifacts of a president have a lot of value to people. They're basically like secular relics in a lot of ways, and I think here as well. It's precisely because Didion is so famous for her work, precisely because people have drawn so much from her work, that her stuff, her things, they become objects of fascination. Maybe we can divine something about what made her mind work in the way it did, from not just what she owned, but how she used it, how it was placed, like all these sorts of things about the objects around her. And I do think that makes a lot of sense. Like just looking around my house right now, I'm like right next to where I'm recording now I have two bookshelves with like Blu-rays on them, and just sort of how they're organized, like all that stuff, like does tell you something about me. It tells you something about how my mind works. And I have to imagine that is especially true of someone like Didion. The things she owned, where they were relative to, you know, where she worked in their house or whatever, they tell you something about her. And it makes total sense to me that this would become, that people would want to own this and would want to covet this.
The thing that I keep thinking is like the only thing I want to read about this auction is like the essay Joan Didion would have written about it. Because first of all, I think you're right that we have this association with everybody. People collect, you know, baseballs that their icons have signed and touched, like the sense of that closeness of possessing an object that was used or touched by someone you revere. Like that's quite common and not that surprising. And then the fact that so many people wanted to possess her sunglasses that they sold for, I think, $27,000 is maybe a testament to the breadth of her fan base and the wealth of some of them. But she was so able in her writing to describe cultural phenomena in ways that were tart, lucid, and funny, and very clear, but also to then ascribe to them like gigantic sweeping sentiments about the decline and fall of humankind or this, that, and the other. And I'd be so interested, you know, she both wrote smartly about America, its relationship with itself, its direction, its fixation on sort of the material and the manic, and then also so smartly about grief and remembrance. And I'm so curious which of her, you know, whether she would interpret this through the lens of human connection and mourning, or whether she would interpret this through a darker lens of like American kind of materialism and missing the point. And, you know, the auction proceeds are going to charity. They're going to fund the Historical Society of Sacramento, which I'm like, you know, curious. I mean, a natural follow-up story for a California-based culture department, if anybody knows one, is probably to figure out exactly what the Sacramento Historical Society is going to do with these proceeds. And the proceeds are also going towards Parkinson's research. So it's hard, you know, it's hard to say that this is all like, you know, for enriching the heirs or anything. It seems like a perfectly fine exercise, but I don't know. The thing I found poignant about it, as someone who is both a deep admirer of Joan Didion's work and also someone who feels slightly suspicious of the like beguiling way in which she made arguments. I just want to know which argument she would make about this, because I think it could go so many interesting ways. And I think that to me is like the testament to a writer worth tangling with in your mind, is like, I don't know what she would have said. And that's kind of part of what was exciting and interesting about her work to me.
Yeah, I think the genius of Didion, I mean, it's so complex. that it, I don't want to pretend to sum it up with one phrase or little pat, formula, but I do think that a serious part of her genius is, she was able to, write, for example, in the 60s about the general nervous breakdown of American society while making her own emotional fragility a perfect synecdoche for it, right? It was like she was the part and there was the whole, and the two were in this constant and dynamic relationship to one another. So she was both able to do, for example, what Mailer did, which was kind of, she never foregrounded herself the way Norman Mailer did, but she made herself a part of her own narrative in a way that felt socially relevant, which is just the fucking golden chalice, right? And at the same time, she was very playful and very cunning, or the people around her were, or I'm sure it was both. But, she did not only invest everything she wrote with her own persona and aura, it was enhanced by photographic images. She was the lens loved Joan Didion, right? And that image of her, the indelible image of her in front of the Corvette Stingray, I think she's wearing the sunglasses in it or whatever. It's, you didn't have trouble picturing Joan Didion, the person, when you read Joan Didion's word on the page. And I think the essence, of the kind of, lock of the saint's hair or fragment of the cross is always that in possessing this object, I will transfer the aura to me. And that, to me, what I don't like about that is that that's the whole point of having written the stuff, right? It's like, that's the essence of reading, right? It's like this intimate way in which the words, like literally the stream of another person's voice becomes your own consciousness, which is only reading does that, not radio, not plays, not anything, right? And that's where the aura gets transferred, and that's what the aura is in some sense. To say that inheres in specific objects, maybe I just have a lacerating, puritanical streak to me, but Jamelle, for some reason, I can't help recoiling a little bit at this.
I don't know. I don't. I totally understand the appeal of wanting to own something that belonged to someone you admire, and even being willing to spend quite a bit of money on it. If I if I somehow came into an enormous sum of money and I learned that Henri Cartier-Bresson's Leica M2 was available for auction, I would totally buy it. I would totally own it to have maybe be able to get a sense of the man's genius, right? Sort of I 100% understand and sympathize with that impulse. It doesn't strike me as materialistic. It does strike me as being in some sense a little spiritual, the funny thing about modernity, about being modern humans, is that we often think of ourselves as so much more sophisticated than people who kept relics around to pray to or whatever. But we do the same thing. We do the same thing in our own way, mediated through the specifics of a particular time and place. And this is what this is to me. This is that. For the very wealthy.
Yeah, it's funny, Jamelle, I follow you on Instagram, and sometimes on Instagram you sell old clothes, like sweaters or blazers, and I bet some people buy those blazers from you because they admire your style, which is not inconsiderable. But I bet there's somebody out there who is an aspiring writer who feels good about having a Jamelle cardigan and gives them a little bit of inspiration. And it's maybe, I want to find my voice and my expertise and figure out how I can put my wisdom into the world. I don't know, maybe that's an imaginary thought poem, but part of I have to imagine that some of your fan base, people who love your writing or your photography and the people who follow you for your perspective on the world, are not just buying your used sweaters because they're like, I need a sweater and that's a good deal and I like that sweater. Like some of the Jamelle-ness of the sweaters must be part of it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure that I've never thought about that, but I'm 100% sure that you're right about that.
Well, I've been thinking about this too. Like my mom and sister and I cleaned out a bunch of my dad's possessions. He died in 2021, and we went through a bunch of them this summer. And he just had he was like a dapper prep and had an understated style, but just had like a big collection of men's shirts for weekend, sort of subtle flannels for dress, and he liked a pink, and he liked a peach, and he liked a subtle plaid, and just this collection of shirts that I picture him in. I have pictures of him in. I received hugs from him in, and my sister and I had this like magical day of kind of divvying them up, and we tried them all on. And they kind of look good on both of us in a menswear way. And each shirt knew which of us it was for. Like, we didn't fight about any of them. Like, it was just clear as soon as we both put them on. Like the shirts chose us, right? Like, this collection of shirts divided themselves up in this afternoon of trying them on. And I've been wearing them a lot, and they just feel nice. And that's obviously different, having an object that belonged to someone you knew and loved so intimately as someone who you admire and know only as an idea or a mind from afar. But I like the generosity of kind of not pathologizing it and just sort of saying like, yeah, good on you, person who aspires to Joan's wisdom and hauteur and remove in her sunglasses, and like, good on you, Jamelle sweater consumer. You know, like, why not?
Why not? All right. Well, certainly if you purchased any of the aforementioned items, we'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, let's move on. All right. Now's the moment in our podcast we tell you about another podcast, and we have Dana Stevens is with us to do just that. Dana, what do we got?
Don't Ask Tig is an advice podcast hosted by comedian Tig Notaro. Tig doesn't have all the answers, but with help from guests like Kristen Bell, Cheryl Lee Ralph, and Paul Rudd, they'll offer up honest and usually hilarious advice for life's many issues. They'll answer your highly relatable questions like, how do you exorcise bad vibes from an inheritance given by an evil relative? How do you snap out of a crush on your therapist? Most importantly, what's the best way to ask out the cute cashier at your local Trader Joe's? Listen, we can't promise it'll be good advice, but it will definitely be a good time. From American Public Media, listen to Don't Ask Tig wherever you get your podcasts.
All right, now is the moment in our podcast when we endorse. Jamelle, what do you have?
I have not yet gotten in the mail, but it's on the way. But it's the Criterion release of Spike Lee's Malcolm X. It's a 4K restoration, so sort of I think scanned from the original camera negative, sort of like remastered, the whole 9 yards. I'm really looking forward to watching it, and I'm just recommending it because I think biopics have like fallen out of style for the most part. And Malcolm X is like one of the films in Spike's, filmography that I think people really respect, but not necessarily everyone's really like stuck with it. It's like it's like an epic. It's like 3 hours long. But I had rewatched it last year, and I've seen it a couple times, and I came away once again struck not just by the sheer ambition of it to tell the story of a very complicated man's life and like the content and just the confines of a film, but the extent to which it is such, and I don't think Spike gets enough appreciation for this. It's such a love letter to classic Hollywood. Spike Lee like very clearly loves Hollywood of the 50s and the 60s and the 40s, and that film has sort of homages and touchstones to those decades, beginning as sort of like a inner city gangster picture. It has not a musical number, but sort of a big dance number that's like very reminiscent of like MGM in the 50s. In School Days has that like phenomenal dance number that it's just sort of like Spike. It feels like to me saying, give me money to make a big musical. But Malcolm X has some of that. It's like an early 60s style prison picture. There are like glimpses of Lawrence of Arabia at the end. It's just like it's such a mishmash of styles and genres and ambition that I continuously find remarkable. I think it's like one of the great American movies, like just, period. And for my money, it is my favorite Spike Lee film. So It's all to say you should watch Malcolm X if you've never seen it. Just really like put away your phone, put away your iPad, your laptop. Like you shouldn't be doing that anyway when you're watching a movie, but like for this, put it away and watch the movie on as big a screen as you can manage. And if you are a maniac like myself and spend all your money on 4K Blu-rays, you should pick up the 4K Blu-ray because those things look great. And it's often like the best possible way to experience an older movie like that, barring being able to see like a 35 millimeter print on a proper screen.
I have not seen that movie. It's a hole in my Spike Lee canon. So I will take your advice and watch it ASAP.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Julia, what do you have?
Okay. I must start with a question. Jamelle, are you watching Andor?
I am watching Andor.
Okay. My endorsement is episode 10 of Andor, which came out a couple weeks ago. It's a great episode in a bunch of ways. There's a kind of exciting rebellion set piece. There's a fraught, tense drama among the financiers of the rebellion. But also, the episode ends with an incredible monologue performed by Stellan Sarsgaard, who plays kind of the guy who's coordinating the fledgling rebellion. And I don't think of the soliloquy as like a modern form, right? That's like Shakespeare wrote them. They're kind of in older plays. Dialogue these days is a bit more rat-a-tat, and if you are giving a long speech, it probably means your thing is fucked. Like, the script isn't good. Like, in general, I think the best screenwriters avoid having characters speechify because it so often sounds wooden, feels wrong, doesn't seem right. I'm very curious for your view of this soliloquy, Jamelle, if you're caught up on the season.
I loved it.
Blew my mind. Like, I feel like it should actually be taught next to Shakespeare soliloquies. Like, it's an incredible piece of writing and performance.
I gotta say, like, it's incredible. I mean, I don't want to spoil anything, but it's in short, it's him sort of like he's meeting with a double agent in the Empire, and it's he's asking this guy to just sacrifice more, like do more for the rebellion. And this guy's like, well, what have you done for the rebellion? And then he just like goes on this tear where he's like, he's basically sort of like, I've destroyed my inner life in order to make this happen. And some of the lines in there are just unbelievable. I've made my mind a sunless place. I share my dreams with ghosts. You know, I live my life for sunrise that someone else will see.
I yearn to be a savior against injustice without contemplating the cost. And by the time I looked down, there was no longer any ground beneath my feet. What is my sacrifice?
It's so good. And the other thing that's amazing about it is how it starts. And it reminded me what's powerful about good soliloquies, which is it's watching someone use speaking to think. And in this case, it's sort of thinking out loud and it's sort of thinking for persuasion. But the first word, so he gets asked, what have you sacrificed? And you watch Stellan Sarsgaard's face and he pauses and he thinks, and you're like, for a moment as watching, you're like, oh no, he's stumped him. He's behind the scenes. He's the spy master. He's not on the front. He isn't sacrificing. Like you're like, is he about to cop to not sacrificing as much? Like what, you have the suspense. Like what is his answer? Does he have a good answer to this double agent who's got such a hard lot? And the first word he says is calm. Like the thing he sacrificed first is calm. And I don't want to spoil more about what he says or overhype it too much, although too late for that. But I love starting with calm because calm, you're like, okay, calm, like for the rebellion, like maybe calm is fine. Like maybe it's fine that you sacrificed calm, but it's calm, kindness, kinship, and then it goes into the also, by the way, Jamelle and I are like reciting this fucking speech from memory because it's so fucking good, and also because I rewound it like three times to watch it.
I immediately rewound it. I was like, I need to watch this again. The other line that like stuck in my head, I burn my decency for someone else's future. Like that's not only writing we don't normally get in like genre shows, period, or like a Star Wars, right? It's sort of just like, that's just like great writing, period. It's just like great. It's so evocative.
And it all works, and I'm sure it sounds overwrought if you're not caught up, Steve, but it's so good. And I'm going to go on record here, and I'm going to call out Mrs. Dana while she's traveling for her book. Somehow we talked about Reboot and this show in rapid succession, and the takeaway I had is that Dana thinks Reboot is one for the ages and Andor is so-so. And I just want to say that as I dig further into Andor, this is the wrongest opinion held on the podcast. And Steve talked about Taylor Swift, and we will return to this when she returns to the show. But this show is so good. You have to be watching it if you are not. I feel like, Jamelle, this show is sort of up your alley. I think the show is kind of not up my alley. Take it from the joint force here. You got to be watching this. It's just incredible what they're doing. That's my endorsement. Thank you, Jamelle. I'm so glad you also are a fan. Fun to dissect it with you.
Oh my God. I just can't compete with that. I mean, I liked a song. Mine's a song.
You got good songs. You've always got good songs up your sleeves. Don't sleep on your song.
Don't condescend to me, Julia. It's just not necessary. It's fine. I like this song. I don't know much about it. A friend sent it to me. It is called Super Rich Kids. It's new. It's from Trio SR9 and a collaboration with Malik Djoudi, DJOUDI, Judy, whose music I really like.
Too many joy rides in daddy's job car. Too many white lines and white lines. Super rich kids with nothing but loose ends. Super rich kids with nothing but fake friends. Real love.
All right, it's just a song. It doesn't have Shakespearean resonances that I'm familiar with yet, but it's fun. Check it out. Jamelle, thank you so much for coming on the show. As always, it just is great to hear from you.
My pleasure, as always.
And Julia, thank you so much. That was fun. That was good.
So fun.
You will find links to some of the things we talked about today at our show page. That's at slate.com/culturefest, and you can email us at culturefest@slate.com. Our introductory music is by the same composer who did the music for She Said, Nicholas Bertel.
And Andor, by the way.
Oh my God. That guy's everywhere. And our production assistant is Jessica Balderrama. Our producer is Cameron Drews. For Jamelle Bouie and Julia Turner, I'm Stephen Metcalf. Thank you so much for joining us. We will see you soon.